Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our Missouri Trailblazers program on Dr. Suzanne Saueressig, brought to you today by the Missouri State Museum. My name is Pam Stone, and I am the Senior Associate here at the Holt Summit Public Library, which is a branch of the Daniel Boone Regional Library. Joining me today is Lauren Williams, who is the Adult and Community Services Manager for the Daniel Boone Regional Library. Lauren, would you like to say hello?
Hi, welcome.
Okay, let's get started. Today's program is the sixth installment of our Missouri Trailblazers series, in which the Missouri State Museum will present another virtual lunch and learn featuring the Trailblazer who has impacted Missouri. The seventh and final installment will be on Tuesday, August 17th at 1 o'clock. So hopefully you can join us for that as well. I want to say a special thank you to the partnership with Missouri State Museum for organizing these presentations. I will now turn things over to Angela Wells, who is the Education Specialist for Missouri State Museum located in Jefferson City, Missouri. Angela, would you like to say a few things about what's going on at the museum?
Thank you, Pam, and thank you everyone for joining us for today's Missouri Trailblazers program. As Pam said, my name is Angela Wells, and I'm the Education and Outreach Specialist for the Missouri State Museum. We opened our Trailblazers exhibit in November of 2020 after a long-awaited planning and production process. We had numerous staff help with the project, and we hope you can find the time to visit this exhibit in the near future and that you love it as much as we do. The theme of Trailblazers came about from this year's Missouri State Bicentennial anniversary, because what better way to commemorate this historical year than highlighting some exceptional people that have helped make our state extraordinary by providing leadership, innovation, and creativity. The Trailblazers exhibit has displays that rotate every few months, so there are always new things to come and see. We also have a brand new exhibit called Memory and Cloth. This exhibit highlights military flags and banners. This exhibit rotates new examples every 6 months from the more than 400 flags and banners in the museum collection, some of which date back as far as the 1830s. Another exhibit we currently have on display is titled Show Me Hooked Rugs, which showcases 36 traditional hooked rugs by Missouri artists, past and present. The rugs will be on display through August at the Missouri State Museum. All the rugs are hand-hooked and reflect a facet of Missouri history and culture. Going along with this exhibit, rug hookers will be demonstrating their talent in the museum on August 17th from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Visitors to the museum can watch as experienced rug hookers create beautiful designs in the history hall. They can also learn from the experts and try their hand at rug hooking themselves. This is an open house type event, so you can come when you can and spend as much time as you'd like. I had mentioned earlier that I am the education specialist for the State Museum, so I want to briefly mention a program that I personally hold near and dear to my heart, and that is the Traveling Trunks program. We offer a number of different traveling trunks available for reservation. Within each trunk are hands-on artifacts, activities, and lesson plans to enrich knowledge of Missouri's cultural and natural history. These are meant to be used as teaching tools for teachers, libraries, families, and event coordinators, and can be checked out for up to 2-week period. Some examples of our trunk topics cover cultural history, such as Missouri Native people, agricultural history, and Missouri's Black business districts. We also offer traveling trunks focusing on Missouri's natural resources, such as insects and spiders, reptiles and amphibians, among others, many others available for reservation. If this is something you're interested in learning more about, you can email the museum at education.statemuseum@dnr.mo.gov. We encourage you to stop by the State Museum and check out the Trailblazers and other exhibits mentioned, as well as our new Bicentennial timeline that highlights important dates throughout Missouri's history. The State Museum is open Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, and Saturday through Sunday, 9 to 4. Without further ado, we hope you enjoyed today's program on Dr. Suzanne Saueressig, and back to you, Pam.
Thank you, Angela. Today's program is about Dr. Suzanne Saueressig. I think my screen might be freezing more, I'm sorry. This afternoon, we are joined by Carrie Hammond. Carrie Mackie Hammond started her museum career in 2012 as an educator, excavation, and research team leader in a small paleontology museum in the southwest part of Missouri. She joined the Missouri State Museum in 2016 as their education specialist. And she stayed in that role until earlier this year when she became the State Museum's chief interpreter, which oversees the museum education department. She recently became the contributing author of a history book featuring a selection of interesting women from Jefferson City. In the future, she aims to become one of Missouri's historical leads in the art of using natural dyes. Thank you all for being here, and now I'll turn things over to Carrie.
Thank you, Pam. All right, I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, can everyone see that? Good. Okay, we're going to talk about Dr. Suzanne Saueressig today. I'm kind of expanding on this just a little bit. She's an amazing woman, but there's not a lot known about her. So we're going to learn a little bit first about the history of veterinary practice. Screen is not advancing.
If you click the arrows down at the bottom, does that work?
Oh, here we go. Maybe that'll, there we go. Sorry, a little technical difficulty. Archaeologists have found evidence of people performing veterinary procedures as early as a Neolithic period, which would have been about 3,400 to 3,000 BCE. So the human Neolithic period time frame was when Stone Age people were transitioning from being hunter-gatherers to a more agricultural type settlement lifestyle. So this was quite a long time ago. Now, the evidence they found was in the form of a cow skull upon which trepanation had been performed. So trepanation, as you see here, was a form of boring a hole in the skull, and this was usually done to relieve pressure, fluid buildup between the brain and the skull. And this is actually something that is still performed, at least a type of it is performed today, and it does seem to be very effective. So it seems like they really had started to have things figured out very early on. And it's believed that sheep herders practiced many different types of rudimentary medical treatment on their ailing livestock. And here we have the Egyptian papyrus of Kahun. This is from the 12th dynasty of Egypt, which would have been about 1800 BCE. And there are a lot of early examples of records of veterinary medicine that have been around. There's been some from India, some from China, but I'm going to focus a little bit on some of the most known or most popular of these. So the evidence for the treatment of sick animals in the ancient world is pretty rare, but this surviving papyrus demonstrates that although the ancient Egyptians did not have a word for veterinarian, they still had a really good basic knowledge of various conditions and treatments. Now, a lot of this document has been lost to time, as you can see by the picture here. But what is there, it references things such as diseases in birds, treatment of intestinal parasites in dogs, and eye examinations of cattle that have airborne diseases. So there's quite a bit of information left in what's here. Now, this document was discovered by an archaeologist named Flinders Petrie in 1889, and it is now in the Petrie Museum of Egyptian Archaeology. So maybe someday we will get to see that in person if we ever travel there. Now, it's pretty much unknown who the first official veterinarian is, but we have several people here that are kind of the highlights. Now, this is Aristotle. A lot of you may be familiar with him. He lived during the 4th century, and he's what some might consider the father of veterinary medicine. In his History of Animals writing, he detailed innumerable observations, not just on domestic livestock, but basically on all forms of life. Now, his work has been republished many times and in many languages. The copies shown here are a surviving Greek version from the 12th century and an Arabic version from the 13th century. Now, however, many would call Galen of Pergamon from Greece as not only the father of animal medicine, but medicine in all forms. Now, he was the most accomplished of all medical researchers of his time, and he lived about 129 to 216 CE. Now, his specialties included anatomy, physiology, pathology, pharmacology, neurology, philosophy, and logic. I can't imagine being an expert in that many things, but apparently he did that. So that is why he is kind of considered the best. And he followed the teaching of Greek physicians such as Hippocrates. And Western medical science was actually influenced by Pergamon for about 1,000 years based on his theories. And during his time in medicine, dissection of human remains was forbidden. So, of course, animals was really the only thing he had to work with. And that is why his teachings have been applied to both people and animals as a means of teaching medicine on all living things. Now here we have Renatus Vegetarius. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right. This is all mostly Latin and Greek names that we have. He lived at about 450 to 500 CE, and he was a writer of the later Roman Empire. He produced a few written works. One is a guide to Roman military, and another is called Digesta Artis Molomedicinia, which is a guide to veterinary medicine. And nothing is known about Vegetus other than his written works, which is kind of sad that he had such an influence on the veterinary field, but we really don't know anything else about his life. And by the 1500s, with the invention of the printing press, publications, including those of medical nature, really flourished. They really accelerated. Now here we have a picture of Hepatrica. This is a collection of Greek texts and excerpts collected from various writings that have been compiled into one manuscript. Now, this was done by an unknown editor, and it was most likely done during the 5th or 6th century. Now, this collection of texts deals with the care and healing of horses. And since the days of Aristotle, who we mentioned before, there have been no books on the diseases of animals, which included the study of anatomy. All that changed with the 1598 publication Del Autonoma et del Infirma del Cavallo by Carleo Rooney, who lived during 1530 to 1598 CE. And you can see the picture here is very detailed. So Rooney was a lawyer and senator in Italy, but from his childhood, he really displayed a love for horses. And he applied himself very diligently into putting his findings of his care and observation of his horses into print. And the book contains very intricate illustrations. The first part of the book is especially important, for it includes references of horse anatomy with numerous and exquisite illustrations that exhibit his extensive knowledge on the subject. So you can see here in the second picture, really not only the detail that he put into it, but his talent for drawing as well. And eventually, official veterinary education begins. So the world's first veterinary school was founded in Lyon, France by Claude Bourgelat in 1762. Now, this actually came about due to the many plagues that ravaged domestic animals in Europe. And during that time, they were dealing with things like anthrax, blackleg, sheeppox, scabies, glanders, contagious pneumonia, strangles, tetanus, wound infections. So they really had a slew of different types of illnesses that they were having to deal with. And what better way to combat that than to build a veterinary school to learn how to treat these animals. And trailed shortly thereafter by the Alfort Veterinary School near Paris, which started in 1764. And then the years following that, Austria, Italy, Denmark, Sweden, Germany, England, and Spain all followed suit with their own veterinary colleges. Now, the very first veterinary colleges in America was the School of Veterinary Medicine and Surgery in Boston, Massachusetts, which was established in 1849, and the New York College of Veterinary Surgeons, which was established in 1859 in Albany, New York. Now, I did find one reference to a veterinary college in Philadelphia that was reported to have been established in 1852. However, that one reference is the absolute only thing I ever found about that. So I have no idea if that was actually factual. If so, there's no other information about it out there. But technically, that means the very first veterinary college in America is still up for debate. The very first female veterinarian in the world that we're aware of was Eileen Cust. Now, she was actually born in 1868 in County Tipperary, Ireland, and she began her education at Williams New Veterinary College in Edinburgh. Her mother was a woman of the bedchamber for Queen Victoria. So when Cust enrolled into the school, she had to do that under an assumed name in order to not draw embarrassment to her family. And I'll talk a little bit more about why she felt the need to do that here in just a little bit. But I would imagine that would be quite the job, having her mother working directly under Queen Victoria. And she completed her education in 1878, and she even won a gold medal for her studies in zoology. However, she was denied participation in her final exams. Due to this, she was not admitted into the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons. Now, she challenged this, seeking to overturn this decision to the examination committee, but the court declined to rule on it. And due to the potential costs and social embarrassment for her mother, she decided not to pursue the issue any farther. But nevertheless, she went ahead and began practicing veterinary medicine in Ireland, and she actually had the blessing of her university. So that was definitely good for her. And by 1904, she was briefly engaged to the son of a family friend. However, the wedding was called off due to his family's objection to her career choice. And at the death of her employer in 1910, she actually took over the veterinary practice from him. And she ran the clinic alone until the outbreak of World War I. And at that time, she volunteered her services on the front line of the war to care and treat war horses and mules. And in 1922, due to, in part to her heroism and her devotion to the animals of the war, the Royal College of Veterinary Medicine and Surgeons finally recognized her practicing veterinary medicine in her own right. And the president of the college actually personally presented her with her diploma. Unfortunately, due to failing health, she only practiced another 2 years before retiring. And then in 1937, at the age of 68, she actually passed away from heart failure while she was visiting a friend in Jamaica. So she kind of seemed to get the short end of the stick on there, especially for all of her hard work. Now, in regard to our home state, Missouri, veterinary medicine education first began at the University of Missouri in 1884 and went through many changes in its first several decades. It started out as just a single course in veterinary science, then became a small division within the agriculture department, then a school in a separate but equal division of the university, and finally, the standalone College of Veterinary Medicine. In 1952, the University of Missouri graduated its very first female veterinarian, Dr. Edna Garemore. Now, you're probably asking yourself, why was she the first woman? If she was the first woman to graduate from veterinary school in Missouri, why is she not the first female veterinarian in Missouri? Well, the reason for that is she did not practice here after she graduated. She actually opened a clinic in Chicago where she stayed for about 20 years, then moved her practice to Washington, and then retired in Tucson, Arizona, and passed away in 2007 at the age of 85. So she was the first female veterinary graduate of Missouri, but not the first female veterinarian in Missouri. Now, the history of women in veterinary practice is quite extensive. Now, for a long time, the practice was very dominated by men, and there were several reasons for this. But one of the main reasons was that the veterinary medicine, much of the time, can be dirty, physically demanding, and emotionally taxing. And even in the 19th century, women were seen as society as exceptionally frail, meek, too soft for such a job. And the women who defied the stigma and fought against the opposition of a career in the veterinary field really blazed this trail for all the women following them, because this was very taboo in that time frame. And they had to overcome an enormous amount of obstacles that men did not have to face. And many times they were ridiculed by their families, their classmates, and their colleagues. The very first woman known to have become an official career in veterinary medicine in the United States was a young woman named Minion Nicholson. Now, Minion attended the McKillop Veterinary College in Chicago in 1903. However, virtually nothing is known about her life or veterinary career following her graduation. So we don't know if she was able to become a veterinarian in career, if she only had the degree, or if she started a family. We have absolutely no information on her whatsoever, which is very unfortunate. The women in veterinary medicine grew very slowly over the next couple of decades, with very few women attempting the career in any official capacity. And even by the 1940s, women only encompassed about 4% of veterinary students. When women first began to break into this male-dominated field, the obstacles they faced were really enormous. From being told it was unethical for a woman to study alongside male students and that they would bring shame upon their families, to female medical students in Russia being forcibly removed by police from school auditoriums. However, women were not the only group affected by the belief system of that time. Other minorities, including Jews and Blacks, were also restricted. And it was common for employment postings to advertise that women should not apply for a job because they would not be employed. That was actually published in newspapers, posted signs in storefronts, basically anywhere you would look. At this point, they would say for women not to apply for jobs. The belief was that they should stay home and devote their lives to their families and their children, and that a married woman with a degree was considered a detriment to her husband's career. And some women were even accused of using this area of study only to attract a man, and others were tormented by their fellow students in an effort to scare them away from the school. Lots of pranks and different things of that nature that were going on at that time to try to scare away the meek and mild women that were attending. This here shows these pictures that I have here. We have some women in the top picture that were in nursing. So we have a lot of nursing that was going on. They were fine with women coming in and learning nursing to help with people, but of course it was, even though we all know it was still dirty and taxing and emotionally straining, they felt like that was okay, but then working with animals was not. So it was definitely kind of a double standard. And the two bottom pictures you see here, we have two graduating classes from the college that Minion Nicholson attended in Chicago. And you'll notice every single one of those is male. I don't have the actual picture of her graduating class, but this shows the typical graduating class for that time. And we're going to talk just a little bit before we get to Suzanne about the history of humane societies and shelters, because that is what she devoted her life to. The early records of people coming together to advocate for the better treatment of animals seems to go back to the beginning of recorded time. And I think most of us can really relate to that. However, these groups started to really gather strength and strive for kind of an official capacity in the 1800s. They really wanted to make a difference. And small organizations and animal shelters were beginning to crop up all over the United States. And they typically started out with just a few citizens. They might have makeshift sheds and different things to house animals in. And they started a nationwide push toward improvement of animal treatment and, of course, helping give homes to homeless animals and also to connect lost animals to their owners. Now, one of these citizens was a woman by the name of Caroline Earl White from Philadelphia. White started the first U.S. animal shelter in 1869, along with a group of 30 women animal activists. And what began as a crusade to provide carriage horses with fair treatment transformed into the group providing 35 horse drinking fountains throughout the city of Philadelphia, many of which, believe it or not, are still in existence and used today. So that is definitely something I am going to look for if I ever get to Philadelphia and see if I can find some of those. Those would definitely be a wonderful treasure. Within a year, the group had developed a shelter for homeless dogs and cats and worked toward using education as a means to combat the ever-growing struggles facing homeless animals. Now, White is quoted as saying, "Animals have certain rights, as inalienable as those of man, to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Now, stemming from these scattered small groups, we had the formation of large groups and organizations such as the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, most commonly known as the ASPCA, and that was actually founded in 1870, and American Humane, which was founded in 1877. The first goals of these organizations were to establish treatment guidelines for working animals and livestock in transit. It wasn't too long after that child safety and protection was added to their agendas. So at that time, there were really no laws in place to protect children. So when these organizations for animals started coming up, the citizens thought, hey, we need to kind of combine our efforts. And so these organizations became in charge of children as well. And this included lobbying for child labor laws and foster care reform. And even today, these groups are still in existence. And while they no longer have children as part of their mission, they are continuing to strive for the betterment of all animals. And if any of you are familiar with an organization called the Red Star, that is a group that cared for the animals of World War I, the horses and the mules, and sometimes even the dogs and the pigeons and things that were involved in that. And that is actually an organization that was formed from American Humane at the start of the war. And I gave a talk a little over 4 years ago about the animals of World War I, which is an incredible and extensive topic all on its own. So if you have a chance to learn about that, it's really amazing that the things they did with that and how Red Star helped these animals, especially after the war. And Red Star Rescue is actually still responding to animals in crisis today. So anytime there's any type of major disaster, whether it be a natural disaster or something else, Red Star is right there in the front lines helping those animals out. Now, the expansion of these official groups included the founding of the Missouri Humane Society, and this group started in 1874. And by 1932 alone, the Missouri Humane Society handled a record 33,000 animals. And during this time is when they began offering free clinics for animals and striving kind of to reunite lost pets with their owners and kind of give the community a little bit of support. And then in 1955, we have the entrance of Dr. Suzanne Saueressig to the Missouri Humane Society. Now, Suzanne was born on February 4th, 1925 in Nuremberg, Germany, and was the oldest of 4 siblings. And she was the type of child who knew from an early age exactly where she was headed. As an adult, she was asked to look back on her younger years in Germany. She was been quoted as saying, "I never dressed dolls, only dogs and cats." And she actually once told a story from her childhood. It really kind of showcases her brilliance and her empathy. She claims that when she was about 10 years old, the family cat came up missing. And for some reason, which she did not disclose, she immediately suspected the family was live-in maid. And so what she did to handle the situation was she caught a whole bunch of mice and she placed them in the dresser drawer of the maid and then waited for the maid to find them. And after they were discovered, and of course the maid was very upset, the cat almost immediately reappeared. So she apparently had that family maid pegged. Now, Suzanne knew at a young age that she wanted to be a veterinarian. She began working toward that goal as soon as she was able to do so. And when becoming educated as a veterinarian, typically one obtains a 4-year college degree before being accepted into veterinary school, and then has more years of schooling. Now, when she was working on her 4-year degree, Suzanne had taken numerous nursing courses in preparation for a future in veterinary medicine. However, due to these nursing courses, she was drafted into the German Army Nursing Corps during World War II. I'm certain she gained a lot of experience working as a nurse during the war, but she had mentioned several times throughout her life that she could never become a medical doctor. She had absolutely no desire to treat people. And so I'm certain, she was anxious to be finished with that and return to her career path. And shockingly, it has been said, and I could not find, unfortunately, any documentation verifying this, but it's been said that she was actually a prisoner of war with the United States for the last year of the war before being released. And I would really hope that, if anyone has any information on that, please let me know, because I would love to read about that and kind of find out more about that situation. And when the war was over, she began working toward her veterinary education at that time. And there were occasional female veterinary students that had started attending at that time, but it was still not very widely accepted and pretty difficult to gain admission still. But lucky for her, the veterinary school in Germany was especially fond of those who had provided service during the war. So most likely her time in World War II attributed to her acceptance into the veterinary college. And once she had school lined out, she began to map out all of her future plans. Now, in typical fashion of that time, her parents were quite unhappy about her choice of profession, as working with animals was, of course, still seen as dirty work that was only suitable for men. But despite this, she trudged on and she graduated from Munich Veterinary College in 1953, and she was actually the only female in her graduating class. And she came to the US, and after she was graduated, and then she had a year of working as an internship before she came to the US, and she traveled here, and that's when she obtained a position as a staff clinician with the Humane Society in St. Louis. And this position officially tagged her as Missouri's first female veterinarian. Her plan was that she was going to learn as much as she could about American veterinary science and medicine and spend about a year doing that. And then she was going to move on to South America and eventually Africa and learn from those countries as well. However, once she really got into her work at the Humane Society, she was appalled by the horrible problem of pet overpopulation. And I mean, the nation and the state were both plagued with this issue. And instead of following her previous plan of traveling on to South America and Africa, she decided she could not leave, and she took on the weight of trying to tackle this problem. And she once referred to this problem as chipping away at an iceberg with a teaspoon. And this was back in the 1950s. So you can imagine how much worse this problem is today if it was already that bad in the 1950s, even with people like Suzanne Saueressig working diligently to try to combat this problem. There's just not enough people working towards the goal to catch up. Now, Suzanne was put in charge of the Missouri Humane Society facility and its large staff, had a lot of interns. And one of those interns was named Richard Regal. And when they met, they actually quickly fell in love and were married in 1956. So not too long after they met. And for their honeymoon, they actually took an afternoon off and took their dog for a walk in Babbler State Park, which was not too far from the clinic. Suzanne was named Chief of Staff of the Missouri Humane Society in 1965, and she actually became known as Chief by her colleagues, clinic visitors, and friends. They said it was a reference of fondness and respect to her. And it was at this time that she really amped up her work in updating the clinic. And she really wanted to focus on improving the surgical facilities. She raised the standards in the clinic by implementing sanitation practices, cleanliness in the animal holding areas, and encouraging the use of modern equipment such as x-rays. A lot of these things were new at the time. They had known about surgical standards as far as sanitation and things for quite some time, but all kinds of new equipment was coming in, like special x-ray machines and other different types of medical devices that were coming in. And she wanted to have the best of everything they could possibly get in order to care for these animals. And one of the things she would do to ensure that her staff was properly cleaning animal cages is she would take a small comic, like a newspaper comic, and she would actually slide that in under the layers of newspaper in the animals' cages. And then she would come back the next day and she would look in those layers of newspaper to see if the comic was still there. And if it was, she would know that the cage had not been cleaned, at least in a day. And so it's just kind of her sneaky little way of staying on top of things. Now, later that same year, the chief and her staff began spaying all the female dogs and cats that were adopted through the shelter. And 2 new adoption wings were added to her clinic. So they really started expanding at that point. In a 2005 interview for the clinic newsletter, she mentioned that in the beginning of her surgical standards crusade, that the board of directors for the Missouri Humane Society asked her to practice her surgery on deceased dogs instead of living ones. Even though she was the chief of staff for this hospital clinic and had been through veterinary school and was technically a veterinary surgeon, they didn't want her to do surgery on live animals. However, her employees trusted her so much that they started bringing in their own personal pets for her to spay. So she was able to kind of gain a lot more practice doing that and making her staff's animals a lot happier and healthier in the process. Now, she not only improved surgical facilities and practices, she actually helped the Missouri Humane Society build a 120-seat education auditorium. She added 2 animal ambulances and an investigation unit to the vehicle fleet. And she had an education vehicle added that was called Know Us Ark. And I looked and looked for pictures of this vehicle so I could add it to the program. And I have not been able to find anything anywhere, which was very sad because I think that is an awesome vehicle to have in a fleet. And I hope they have something really cool like that today too. And actually in 1983, Governor Kit Bond used the Missouri Humane Society's auditorium to sign a revised statute into law. Now, this statute allowed for the very first time in Missouri history that search and seizure warrants could be obtained to use to rescue abused or neglected animals from situations. So that was a really groundbreaking statute that he signed, and it was kind of an honor for him to sign that in that auditorium that they had built specifically for education. And due to Suzanne's advocacy and her need for public education regarding all of these issues, she was given her own column in the St. Louis Globe Democrat newspaper. Now, this column ran from 1979 to 1985 and was titled Ask the Pet Doctor. And over the years, she answered thousands of pet-related questions for the community. And I very, very, very vaguely remember seeing that column when I was a child because I was obsessed with animals at that point. And now I wish that I would have kept that newspaper at that time because that would have been pretty neat to have. And during her very serviceable life, she was actually awarded the Woman Veterinarian of the Year in 1972 by the National American Veterinary Medical Association. And she served on numerous veterinary organizations, was an active member of her local community, and was an invaluable mentor to numerous other veterinarians. Now, Chief is hailed as the main reason the clinic at the Missouri Humane Society is one of the largest in the Midwest today. Currently, the clinic sees over 80,000 patients and performs well over 15,000 surgeries per year. And the current staff continues to build off of Chief's influence by continuing to expand the facility and maintaining the same high standards that she expected when she was Chief of Staff. And her local community actually paid homage to her hard work and kind heart by awarding her the title of Leader of Distinction in 1983 through the YWCA Metro St. Louis Academy of Leaders. Now, I have tried to find pictures for both this award and the award that she was given by the National American Veterinary Medical Association, and I have not been able to find anything. And I think part of the reason for that is because she has no descendants. They had no children, and her family lived back in Germany. I don't know about her husband's family, but I'm not sure why those organizations have not put any photographs back, because they were not that long ago that happened. But I've not been able to find anything on those, which is unfortunate. So if I ever do, I'll put it on the internet for everyone to see. Now, Chief passed away on February 8th, 2013 at the age of 88. And her husband, Richard Regal, died just 2 months later in April. So they may not have left behind any children, but they left behind a legacy of strength, compassion, and education that will live on for many years to come. I did not find anything with her obituary, but with his obituary, Dr. Regal's obituary, a lot of people had commented on the website that had his online obituary. And it was just one comment after another talking about how wonderful both of them were, how much they were loved and how much they would be missed, and what incredible doctors they were. And there were even some stories about adults that had wrote when they were children, they came into the clinic and how they were treated, and how one of them even grew up to become a veterinarian himself, specifically based on the experience that he had as a child visiting their clinic. Today, the number of women in veterinary medicine has increased substantially. It was just 100 years ago, the rate of women in veterinary school was less than 1%. Within that time frame, not only have they matched their male counterparts, but they have superseded them. The number of women enrolled in veterinary college today is between 75 and 80%. So they really have taken over the industry. And we thank Chief and all her amazing women in veterinary medicine who blazed this trail for us and showed the world all of the great things that we have to offer. Okay, any questions?
If you have questions, you can type those in the chat. You can also raise your hand if you want to have your microphone unmuted to ask a question for Carrie.
Okay, I have a couple questions for you, Carrie. Can you hear me? Okay. How many humane societies are there in Missouri?
Well, while many shelters have the word Humane Society in their name, they're not actually affiliated with the United States Humane Society. They work independently from them. The official United States Humane Society actually does not own any shelters, but they do have 5 animal sanctuaries. There's one in California, Florida, Massachusetts, Oregon, and Texas. So they're not actually shelters. They're just places where animals of all types can come to live out the rest of their lives, and depending on what their situation was. their main focus is larger systematic legislative issues, animal welfare law changes. They don't really have any involvement in shelters and smaller rescue situations, at least not right now. But Missouri actually ranks 14 out of 50 for the amount of shelters in the state. So if you think about that, out of 50 states, we're number 14. So that's pretty significant. So we're in the top half. And we essentially have 4 shelters for every 100,000 residents. So there are approximately 224 shelters, active shelters in the state of Missouri.
Okay, that's awesome. I have another question here. Were there any noteworthy stories that happened during Chief's time at the Humane Society itself?
There's just a couple of them that I've heard about. One of them is that a lioness was brought into the Humane Society in 1962 for sanctuary. Now, why it was brought in, I'm not sure. I don't have any of the details on that. But they actually kept that lioness. She was about 200 pounds. They kept her in the basement of the clinic for several weeks, and she actually became a very, very loved friend of all of the staff. I'm assuming she was fairly tame, and they really bonded with her. What happened to her after that point, I'm not sure. And then they also had, and I was doing research for one of my other programs that I had done before about some crimes, and I came across an article in the paper about a robbery. So there were 2 women and 2 men that had created a bank robbery situation, and when they were arrested, there was a jaguar, a baby jaguar, found in the closet of their hotel room that was guarding $47,000 worth of loot from the bank robbery. And that baby jaguar was actually taken to the Humane Society to be taken care of. And I'm not sure what happened after that point with that either, but they apparently had some pretty extensive fun with some big cats in the past.
That's great. Do you know if there are any other horse drinking fountains in any other states? I found that fascinating.
That is really fascinating. And I don't know, I have not researched that any further, but I would imagine there probably would be some maybe in New York City, because they've had mounted police for a really long time, even after motorized vehicles came into play. So I would not be surprised if they had them there. As far as other cities, I'm not sure, but it would definitely be probably a topic all on its own.
I have another question for you here. Are there any other Ask a Pet Doctor columns Dr. Saueressig's columns, her Ask a Pet Doctor, columns easily findable, either digitized or on microfilm?
I did not find any. I looked on like newspapers.com, which is supposed to have just about everything. And not only did I not find any of her columns on there, I did not find anything on newspapers.com from that particular newspaper. So I'm not sure if that's just not a newspaper that they have associated with their site. I did some other general searches, didn't find anything. The only thing that I haven't done, because I ran out of time, was to check with the Missouri Archives. That would be about the only other place I could think to look for those.
Okay. What is the YWCA that gave the chief her Leader of Distinction title?
That was actually the Young Women's Christian Association is what that started as. There was actually a men's version that started beforehand. It was started in 1844, and it was developed for young men in London, England. And so then the Women's Association was developed in 1858. And basically what that started out was they were trying to help people that came in, especially young single people that came into the city looking for work. They had nowhere to live. They didn't have anyone to kind of help them get their feet off the ground and kind of move forward with their lives. They kind of had the same, those 2 organizations had the same mission statement. They were going to build this fellowship with these young men and women. And since it started out as a religious organization, they were devoted to Christian religion and fellowship, and they wanted to really kind of branch out on that and kind of deal with the social living aspect of lives of these young people. And over the years, it really changed. They kind of went from just being that to being orphanages. They were low-cost resorts, which is, I think, what a lot of us associate with that term today. And some of them even became employment bureaus to really help, these people with their new jobs. And even by the 1960s, they really started pushing things like civil rights and empowering women. So they really were kind of and of course, they're fighting racism as well. So they really have kind of branched out into this all-encompassing organization that is basically just trying to better everyone. And they have like over 2 million people involved in the organization nationwide right now.
Was there anything unusual or anything that stood out to you in your research with your project that you're presented today that you would like to share with us?
There were a lot of really incredible people that were kind of pioneers in veterinary medicine. Even so, in the last 30 or 40 years, that have just come into the scene in that time frame, that have really done all kinds of amazing things. And I, of course, didn't have time to put them in this program because it would have been too much information for the time frame that we had. But I encourage anyone that's interested in veterinary medicine or the history of veterinary medicine or what's currently going on in veterinary medicine to read up on this subject, because there's so much incredible information out there.
Okay. Does anyone else have a question for Carrie? I did find this interesting. Someone had commented that the welfare of animals was focused on before the welfare of children. That was really surprising.
Yes, and that actually started with horses. And the reason for that is because horses were seen as such a commodity, because they were not only considered livestock, they were also the main method of transportation. And a lot of people, their jobs were tied directly to their horses, whether they were their horse was taking their stuff to market, or, they were doing something else. They were using it to pull carts full of rocks or logs. I mean, all different types of jobs were tied to horses. And their main focus was keeping the horses healthy to continue to be able to do their work. And so I think that's how it got focused first. So they had all these work horses in the city, and people were seeing that how hard they were being worked and felt like they weren't being treated well. Whereas you had children who, a lot of times, the abuse and neglect for those were behind closed doors, and it wasn't as readily apparent as it was with these workhorses who were out on the street being seen by everyone walking around.
Okay. Want to let everyone know that August events for the Missouri Trailblazers is on John Williams, Blind Boone, and Carl Schurz. You can check that out on DBRL. You can also go on the Missouri State Parks website. Make sure to check them out as well. Carrie, we want to thank you for your expertise and sharing your time with us on this subject. And we are so grateful, as a panelist or an attendee had mentioned earlier, to know that Dr. Saueressig gave us a wonderful, long-lasting contribution to veterinary medicine. So I want to thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me talk to you all today.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us. We appreciate it. And we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.